I could feel his eyes on me all evening, lingering a little too long when he thought no one was looking. Gregory was Kate's dad, 45, and commanding in a way that made my pulse quicken every time he spoke. When he offered to drive me home after dinner, I should have said no. Instead, I found myself sliding into his passenger seat, the leather warm against my bare thighs, my dress riding higher than it should have. The engine purred to life, and something electric sparked between us in the darkness of his car. His hand brushed mine as he shifted gears, sending heat racing up my arm. "You look incredible tonight, Amber," he murmured, his voice deeper than usual. I turned to face him, catching the way his jaw tensed as his gaze flickered to my lips. The air between us crackled with dangerous possibility, and I knew we were crossing a line we couldn't uncross. Before we dive deeper, hit that like button and subscribe if you're enjoying this story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens. Next, the drive to my apartment should have taken 15 minutes. Instead, Gregory pulled into an empty parking lot behind a closed shopping center, the streetlights casting long shadows across his face. "We need to talk," he said, but his eyes were saying something entirely different. My heart hammered against my ribs as he turned off the engine, leaving us in intimate darkness punctuated only by the distant glow of neon signs. "About what?" I whispered, though I already knew. The tension that had been building all evening, all those stolen glances and accidental touches, had finally reached its breaking point. He shifted in his seat, facing me fully. "About the way you've been looking at me. About the way I can't stop thinking about you." His honesty hit me like a physical force, making my breath catch. This was Kate's father, my best friend's dad, but in this moment he was just Gregory, a man who wanted me as desperately as I wanted him. "Gregory," I started, but he reached over, his fingers tracing along my jawline with gentle precision. "Tell me to stop," he said softly, his thumb brushing across my bottom lip. "Tell me this is wrong, and I'll drive you home right now." Instead of words, I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering closed as warmth spread through my core. When I opened them again, his gaze was dark with desire and something deeper, a hunger that made my skin tingle with anticipation. "I can't," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I don't want you to stop." That was all the invitation he needed. His mouth found mine in the darkness, soft at first, testing, then deeper as I responded with equal fervor. His lips were warm and, sure, moving against mine with practiced confidence that made my toes curl in my heels. One hand tangled in my hair while the other traced the curve of my neck, each touch sending electricity shooting through my veins. I pressed closer, my hands finding the solid planes of his chest beneath his shirt. He was broader than men my age, more substantial, carrying himself with the kind of quiet authority that came from experience. When his tongue swept against mine, I let out a soft moan that seemed to ignite something primal in him. "Move to the back," he murmured against my lips, his voice rough with need. The back seat felt like our own private world, spacious enough for us to explore each other without the awkward limitations of the front seats. Gregory's hands were everywhere, skimming along my sides, tracing the hem of my dress, making me arch into his touch with desperate need. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his lips trailing along my throat. Each word sent shivers racing across my skin, making me feel more desired than I ever had before. His mouth found that sensitive spot where my neck met my shoulder, and I gasped, my fingers clutching at his shirt. The windows began to fog as our breathing grew heavier, creating our own intimate cocoon away from the world outside. Gregory's hands moved with confident precision, knowing exactly how to make me tremble, how to draw those soft sounds from my throat that seemed to drive him wild. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, pulling back to search my eyes in the dim light. Even in his desire, he was thinking of me, making certain this was what I truly wanted. That consideration only made me want him more. "Yes," I breathed, pulling him back to me. "I've never been more sure of anything." His response was to claim my mouth again, deeper this time, more possessive. His hands worked at the zipper of my dress with practiced ease, the fabric whispering as it fell away. The cool air against my exposed skin made me shiver, but his touch quickly warmed me, his palms mapping every curve and hollow with reverent attention. When his mouth followed the path his hands had traced, I thought I might dissolve completely. He took his time, savoring each response he drew from me, building tension with deliberate care. My back arched off the leather seat as sensation overwhelmed me, my fingers threading through his hair to hold him close. "Gregory," I whispered his name like a prayer, and he lifted his head to meet my gaze. "I know," he said softly, understanding exactly what I needed. His hands moved to his own clothes, and I helped him, eager to feel his skin against mine. When nothing remained between us, the connection was electric, two people giving in to something that had been building since the moment we'd met. He positioned himself above me, his weight supported on his forearms, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're incredible," he murmured, and then he was moving, slow and deep, filling me completely. The sensation was overwhelming, not just the physical connection, but the emotional intimacy of it, the way he watched my face as if memorizing every expression. The rhythm we found was perfect, unhurried despite the dangerous setting. Each movement sent waves of pleasure through me, building higher with every touch, every kiss, every whispered endearment. The car rocked gently with our movements, the leather seats creaking softly beneath us, but all I could focus on was the man above me and the way he made me feel completely alive. His lips found mine again as the tension coiled tighter within me, his tongue matching the rhythm of his body. I could feel myself approaching the edge, every nerve ending singing, and when he shifted the angle slightly, I cried out softly against his mouth. "That's it," he encouraged, his voice rough with his own approaching release. "Let go for me." The climax hit me like lightning, pleasure crashing through my body in waves that left me trembling and breathless. Gregory followed moments later, his face buried in my neck as he groaned my name, his body tensing before relaxing completely against mine. We lay there in the aftermath, hearts racing, skin damp with perspiration, the windows completely fogged around us. Gregory's fingers traced lazy patterns on my shoulder, and I could feel his smile against my hair. "That was," he began, but words seemed inadequate. "Incredible," I finished, tilting my head to meet his gaze. The tenderness I saw there made my chest tighten with emotion. This hadn't just been about physical desire, there was something deeper developing between us, something that both thrilled and terrified me. The sound of a passing car brought us back to reality, reminding us of where we were and what we'd just done. Gregory sat up first, running a hand through his disheveled hair as he looked out at the empty parking lot. "We should get you home," he said, though his reluctance was obvious. I nodded, knowing he was right, but wishing we could stay in this bubble forever. We dressed in comfortable silence, stealing glances and soft touches as we made ourselves presentable. When Gregory started the car again, the spell was broken but not forgotten. The drive to my apartment was quiet, filled with meaningful looks and the weight of what had just happened between us. As he pulled up to my building, Gregory reached over to take my hand. "Amber, about tonight, I don't regret it," I said quickly, squeezing his fingers. "Do you?" "No," he replied immediately. "But this complicates things. Kate is your best friend, my daughter. We have to be careful." I nodded, understanding the delicate position we were now in. "What happens next?" He brought my hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to my knuckles. "I don't know. But I know I can't pretend this didn't happen, and I can't pretend I don't want it to happen again." The honesty in his voice made my heart skip. "Neither can I." We exchanged a look that promised this was far from over, despite the obstacles we'd face. I climbed out of the car on unsteady legs, my body still humming from his touch. As I walked to my door, I could feel his eyes on me, and when I turned back, he was still watching with an intensity that made my breath catch. The next morning brought harsh sunlight and the reality of what I'd done. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, noting the slight marks on my neck where Gregory's mouth had been, the satisfied glow that I couldn't quite hide. My phone buzzed with a text from Kate, asking if I wanted to meet for coffee, and guilt twisted in my stomach. But alongside the guilt was something else, anticipation, the memory of Gregory's hands on my skin, the way he'd whispered my name, the connection we'd shared in the intimate darkness of his car. It had been wrong on so many levels, but it had also been the most intense experience of my life. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Kate was already there, scrolling through her phone with a casual smile. She looked up as I approached, and for a terrifying moment, I was certain she could see everything written on my face. "Hey you," she said, standing to hug me. "Thanks for coming to dinner last night. Dad said he gave you a ride home. I hope he wasn't too boring." The casual mention of her father made my cheeks burn. No, he was fine. Perfect gentleman. If only she knew how far from the truth that was. We sat down with our coffees, and Kate launched into a story about her morning, but I found it hard to concentrate. All I could think about was Gregory, wondering if he was thinking about me too, if he was reliving those moments in his car the way I was. "You seem distracted," Kate observed, tilting her head. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I lied, forcing a smile. "Late night." She accepted the explanation, but I noticed her studying me with slight concern. The guilt intensified, mixing unpleasantly with the lingering excitement in my veins. Kate was my best friend, had been since college, and here I was harboring this enormous secret that would destroy her if she knew. But even as I sat there, nodding along to her conversation and trying to act normal, my phone buzzed with a message. My heart stopped when I saw Gregory's name on the screen. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Need to see you again." I quickly deleted the message, but not before Kate noticed my reaction. "Who was that?" "Just work," I said, hoping my voice sounded steady. "Nothing important." The rest of our coffee date passed in a blur of forced normalcy, but underneath it all was the thrumming awareness of Gregory's message, the promise it contained, and the dangerous path we were embarking on together. That evening, I found myself driving past Kate's house without really meaning to, my heart racing as I spotted Gregory's car in the driveway. The lights were on in the living room, and I could see figures moving around inside. A normal family evening that I was suddenly on the outside of, looking in with knowledge that changed everything. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Gregory's name appeared on the screen, and I answered before I could think better of it. "Where are you?" he asked without preamble. "Outside your house," I admitted, feeling foolish. "Drive to the park on Maple Street. I'll meet you there in 10 minutes. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone with my heart hammering against my ribs. I should have driven home, should have ended this before it went any further. Instead, I found myself pulling away from the curb and heading toward the park, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. Gregory was already there when I arrived, leaning against his car in the shadows of the old oak trees. He looked as conflicted as I felt, running a hand through his hair as I approached. "This is crazy," he said as soon as I was within earshot. "I know," I replied, but I kept walking toward him anyway. I told Kate I was going to the store. I have maybe 20 minutes before she starts wondering where I am. "Then we better make them count," I said, surprised by my own boldness. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us, his hands framing my face with gentle urgency. "I've been thinking about you all day, about last night, about how you felt in my arms." His words sent heat spiraling through me, and I leaned into his touch. "I can't concentrate on anything else. Kate was talking to me today, and all I could think about was you." "God, Amber," he groaned, his thumb tracing across my cheekbone. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," I whispered honestly. "But I don't want to stop." He kissed me then, desperate and hungry, as if he'd been holding himself back all day and finally couldn't anymore. I melted against him, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss was different from last night, more urgent, more reckless, flavored with the knowledge of how dangerous this all was. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gregory rested his forehead against mine. "We can't keep doing this. Here. Someone will see us." "Then where?" I asked, my voice husky with need. He was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with himself. "There's a hotel on the highway, the Riverside Inn, room 237, tomorrow at 8. The suggestion hung between us, loaded with implications. If I showed up, we'd be taking this to the next level, making it real in a way that couldn't be undone. If I didn't, maybe we could pretend this was just a moment of madness that would fade with time. "I don't know if I can," I said, though my body was already responding to the idea. "Neither do I," he admitted, "but I know I need to try." We parted ways reluctantly, stealing one last kiss before returning to our separate cars. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities and consequences. What was I doing? This was Kate's father, a man twice my age with responsibilities and complications I couldn't even imagine. But the memory of his hands on my skin, the way he'd looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, made it impossible to simply walk away. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every hour felt like an eternity as I debated with myself, changing my mind a dozen times about whether to meet Gregory at the hotel. Kate called twice, chattering about work and weekend plans, unknowingly twisting the knife of guilt deeper with each casual mention of her father. By 7:30, I was standing in front of my closet, heart pounding as I selected what to wear. The simple act of choosing an outfit felt like crossing a line, acknowledging that I'd already made my decision even if I wasn't ready to admit it to myself. The Riverside Inn was exactly the kind of place designed for discretion: dimly lit hallways, thick carpets that muffled footsteps, staff who minded their own business. Room 237 was at the end of a quiet corridor, and I stood outside it for a full minute before finally raising my hand to knock. Gregory opened the door almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting right beside it. He was still wearing his work clothes, but had loosened his tie, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made my chest tighten. "You came," he said softly, stepping aside to let me enter. "I couldn't stay away," I admitted, stepping into the warmly lit room. It was nicer than I'd expected. A king-sized bed with crisp white linens, a small sitting area, soft lighting that made everything feel intimate and safe. Gregory closed the door behind me, and suddenly we were alone again, the outside world locked away. The tension that had been building all day crystallized into something almost tangible, crackling in the air between us. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, echoing his question from the night before. "Once we cross this line, there's no going back," I turned to face him fully, seeing the desire and concern warring in his dark eyes. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. What followed was a slow, deliberate exploration of each other, not the frantic passion of the car, but something deeper and more thorough. Gregory took his time, mapping every inch of my skin with reverent attention, making me feel cherished and desired in ways I'd never experienced before. The connection between us transcended the physical, becoming something that touched my soul. When he moved above me, our eyes locked. I felt as if we were sharing more than just our bodies. We were sharing pieces of ourselves that we'd never given to anyone else. Afterward, we lay tangled in the hotel sheets, my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my bare shoulder, and I felt more content than I had in years. "What happens now?" I asked quietly, voicing the question that hung between us. Gregory was silent for a long moment, his hand stilling on my skin. "I don't know," he said finally. "This thing between us, it's not something I expected. It's not something I can easily categorize or explain." "Does it need to be categorized?" I asked, tilting my head to look at him. He met my gaze, his expression serious. "It might. Kate is going to notice if we start acting strange around each other. And if she ever found out," the thought hung heavy between us. "Kate would be devastated, not just by the betrayal, but by the complexity of it. Her best friend and her father. It would shatter her trust in both of us." "So what do we do?" I whispered. Gregory's arm tightened around me, pulling me closer. "We're careful, we're smart, and we try to figure out what this is without hurting the people we care about." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the only one we had. As we prepared to leave the hotel separately, maintaining the illusion of normalcy, I couldn't help but wonder how long we could keep this secret, how long we could balance on this knife's edge between desire and disaster. The answer, I suspected, would test both of us in ways we couldn't yet imagine. But as Gregory kissed me goodbye, soft and lingering, I knew I was willing to face whatever came next. Some connections were worth the risk, worth the complications, worth everything you had to sacrifice to keep them alive. Have you ever found yourself drawn to someone you knew you shouldn't want? Someone whose very presence made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and what you were capable of? Tell me in the comments. I want to know if you would have made the same choice I did. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because this story is far from over. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.